Three siblings set sail but never returned. 12 years later, their father uncovers the shocking reason you must join our channel and hit subscribe, because only those who seek the truth behind long-lost secrets will do it before this story begins. The morning sun broke over the quiet harbor town of Seabridge, casting golden light on the weathered docks where the Morgan brothers, Eli, Caleb, and Jonah, prepared their small sailboat for the journey that had consumed their thoughts for months. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and fish, a familiar, comforting smell that had always signified home. But today, it felt different, heavy, as if the very ocean that stretched before them was a vast unknown, one that might never let them return. Thomas Morgan stood silently on the shore, watching his sons with a mix of pride and anxiety. His chest tightened with each movement they made, the sound of creaking wood and the soft slap of waves against the hull echoing in his ears. The morning fog, still clinging to the water's surface, seemed to be pulling the brothers into its depths, erasing them from the world. His sons, his pride and joy, were about to step into the jaws of the ocean, chasing after a dream that had haunted them for years. Eli, the eldest at 28, took charge with a quiet confidence that belied the gravity of the moment. His hands moved with practiced ease, tying knots and checking the rigging, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was the one who had charted the course, who had convinced the others to follow the whispers of the sea and the promises of distant, uncharted isles. Eli was the dreamer, the one who believed in adventure, in treasure, in the endless horizon. And though Thomas had always admired his son's fearless spirit, he couldn't shake the fear that clung to him like a shadow. Caleb, the middle brother, worked at the sails with the same careful precision, his hands steady as he adjusted the ropes, his movements a reflection of the countless days spent sailing on these very waters. He was the practical one, the realist who could fix anything, who kept things grounded when Eli's flights of fancy threatened to carry them too far. His quiet demeanor and intense focus betrayed nothing of the thoughts churning in his mind, but Thomas knew that Caleb was just as committed to this journey as his brothers. Still, Thomas saw the way his son glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting to the distant horizon as if searching for something, or perhaps trying to escape it. Jonah, the youngest at 22, stood at the edge of the boat, his gaze fixed on the water, his posture stiff and rigid. He was the quietest of the three, his usual light-heartedness replaced by a heaviness that made him seem older than his years. Jonah had always been the one to listen, to learn from the others, but now he seemed unsure, as if the weight of what lay ahead was too much for him to bear. He had spoken little since the plan had been made, his usual jokes and banter replaced with silence. His hands, usually so quick to move, now fidgeted with the edge of his jacket, pulling it tighter around his chest as though he could shield himself from the cold uncertainty that hung in the air. Thomas's heart clenched as he watched Jonah, his youngest, caught between the promise of adventure and the fear that gnawed at his insides. He had been there. He knew what it felt like to stand on the edge of the unknown and feel that invisible hand gripping his throat. He had seen the ocean take people before, had watched the way it lured men in with its beauty only to swallow them whole. "They think the ocean is just adventure," Thomas muttered under his breath, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But it's a beast that doesn't forgive." He turned his gaze back to the boat, to his sons. The sight of them, young and full of hope, stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't name, but which burned through him like a fever. They were all so sure, so certain that they could conquer what lay ahead. But the ocean, with its unpredictable moods, could never be tamed, no matter how well they prepared. He had seen it before, in the eyes of sailors who had come back, broken and empty, their dreams drowned by the very waves they had sought to master. Jonah shifted, pulling his jacket tighter around his body, his eyes still trained on the water. He hadn't said much, but his presence, his nervous energy, filled the air between them like a tangible thing. Thomas opened his mouth, ready to offer some comforting words, but he stopped. What could he say? He could tell them to be careful, but the ocean didn't care about care. He could tell them to turn back, but it was too late for that. The sailboat was ready. The wind was picking up, and the horizon stretched out before them, endless and full of promise. Eli turned, flashing a wide grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll be back by autumn," he promised, his voice strong but tinged with something Thomas couldn't quite place. Was it doubt? Fear? Or was it simply the weight of what they were about to do, the burden of knowing that once they left the shore, there was no turning back? Thomas nodded, though the tightness in his chest only grew. He forced a smile, the kind of smile he had worn for years, the one that masked his true feelings. "I'll be waiting," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He waved as the brothers climbed aboard the boat, a final gesture of support, of love, even as the fear within him screamed for them to stay. The harbor's usual bustle fell quiet as the sailboat slipped from the dock and vanished into the morning mist. Days passed, the sun sliding steadily across the sky like a slow-moving clock, and still, no word came from the Morgan brothers. In Seabridge, the smell of salt water and fish mingled in the air, carrying with it whispers of uncertainty. Thomas Morgan stood at the town's edge, watching the waves crash against the shore, his heart heavy in his chest. He had spent every waking hour searching, questioning, hoping, but the town had nothing for him. The merchants were busy, their routines unshaken, and the fishermen? They avoided his eyes when he asked. "They've been swallowed by the sea," an old man named Morris had muttered to him one afternoon, shaking his head. "The sea takes what it wants. Always has." The words had echoed in Thomas's mind, bitter and empty. He refused to let them settle there. The sea, yes, it could be cruel, but not this cruel, not to his sons. Thomas walked down the narrow streets of Seabridge, his boots tapping against the cobblestone as he passed the taverns. Inside, the faint clink of glasses and low murmurs of conversation filled the air. He tried every corner, questioned every man who looked like he might know something. But no one had seen the brothers since they'd sailed away. Not a word, not a sign, not even the smallest whisper of their journey. The tavern keeper, an old friend of his, had shaken his head as well, his gaze falling away when Thomas asked. "Ain't no sense in chasing ghosts, Thomas," he said, voice low, eyes hard. "Some things are better left buried." But Thomas's frustration had only deepened. He couldn't let it go. His sons were not foolish boys who would be caught by a storm without preparation. Eli had planned for months. Caleb had steered with a steady hand, and Jonah, quiet and wise, had always known when to speak and when to listen. They were smart, capable. This couldn't be some senseless accident. That night, as the town settled into uneasy silence, Thomas sat at the small wooden desk in the corner of his study, maps scattered before him. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and ink. He traced the lines of the charts with his finger, his eyes searching for something, anything that could explain where they might have gone. But as the hours stretched on, the only thing that became clearer was his growing sense of dread. He ran his fingers over the strange markings one more time, the shaky ink that marred the otherwise clean map. The shapes didn't make sense, lines, circles, smudges. Each one seemed to hide something, something just out of reach. His mind raced as he flipped through the journal the boys had left behind, a collection of their last notes, sketches, and observations. The entries were frantic toward the end. Eli's handwriting had turned erratic as he described strange occurrences on the water, flickers of lights, unsettling sounds in the wind, and a feeling of being watched. At first, Thomas thought it was simply the panic of being caught in a storm. But now, the more he read, the less sure he was. What had they found out there? The walls of the room seemed to close in around him, the silence oppressive. He clenched his jaw, hands trembling as he gripped the journal harder, forcing himself to read the last entry again. Eli's final words were brief, almost cryptic. "We have found something, but it's not what we thought. There is a darkness here, a shadow over the sea. It's not just the storm. Something is following us." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He stood abruptly, knocking the journal onto the floor, the pages scattering like leaves in a windstorm. His heart pounded in his chest. What did this mean? His eyes narrowed as they scanned the markings on the map again. He could almost hear Eli's voice, clear and strong, as if the boy were standing next to him. "We have found something worth the risk." The town had given up on his sons, written them off as lost. But Thomas could not. He would not. There had to be an answer, a clue hidden somewhere in these maps or in those cryptic notes. The ocean, for all its cruelty, would not have claimed his sons so easily. The door to the study creaked open behind him, and Thomas stiffened. He turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for the lantern at his side. But it was just the night, quiet and still. His mind was playing tricks on him. With a heavy sigh, Thomas slumped back into his chair. He reached for the journal again, flicking through the last few pages. His fingers stopped at a note scribbled hastily, almost in a panic. "Something's wrong. They've seen us. We are not alone." His breath caught again. The words burned in his mind. They were being watched. Was that the darkness Eli had spoken of? The one that followed them? Something was out there, something beyond the storm, beyond the sea. Thomas clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. His sons were out there, alive somewhere. He could feel it in his bones. No matter what it took, he would find them. "I'll find you," he whispered into the empty room. His voice cracked, but the words held steady. "No matter what it takes." The salty air of Seabridge clung to Thomas Morgan's skin as he stood at the edge of the dock, the wind biting through his coat. His boat bobbed gently on the water, but it felt like an anchor weighing down his resolve. His hands trembled as he gripped the rough wood of the railing. The image of his sons' faces, Eli's confident smile, Caleb's steady gaze, and Jonah's quiet concern, flashing through his mind. They were out there somewhere. He had to find them. A voice broke through the noise of his thoughts. "Thomas Morgan?" He turned sharply. The voice belonged to an old man, his skin weathered by years at sea, his white beard ragged and unkempt. His eyes were cloudy, a sign of age, but there was a sharpness to them that seemed to cut through the haze of time. "I'm Greer," the man said, a slow, deliberate motion as he held out a trembling hand. Thomas regarded the man warily. He had heard the name before, a sailor, long past his prime, now a shadow of the man he once was. But there was something in Greer's gaze that drew him in, a silent urgency beneath the surface. "I heard about your boys," Greer continued, his voice low, as if sharing a secret. "I've seen a ship like theirs, just off the Forsaken Isles." Thomas's pulse quickened. The Forsaken Isles. The very name sent a chill through the air. A place no sailor would dare to go. The reefs there were cruel, and the storms that rolled through without warning were fierce enough to swallow a ship whole. Most ships that ventured into those waters never returned. "You're sure?" Thomas asked, his voice tight. Greer nodded solemnly. "Aye. The ship sails, they matched yours. The storm hit not long after, and I heard it. A cry on the wind. Far out there." Greer's gaze drifted, almost lost in the memory. It wasn't just the storm. Something else happened out there. Something darker. Thomas felt a flicker of hope rise, only to be smothered by a deep dread. His sons, Eli, Caleb, and Jonah, had sailed into that storm, and now the sea seemed to be keeping them trapped, its depths claiming what they could not return. His grip on the dock tightened. Greer took a step closer, his breath clouding in the cold air. "I'm telling you, Thomas, there's more to this than just a wreck. There's something about those islands, something the sea doesn't want you to know." Thomas stared at him, searching for any sign of certainty. But Greer's eyes, though bleary with age, held a quiet conviction. "You don't know the whole story, but I've seen it. The Forsaken Isles aren't just about storms and reefs. There's a presence there. I saw someone after the storm, a figure walking along the shore, watching the wreckage with cold eyes." Thomas's heart dropped. Cold eyes. The phrase echoed in his mind. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Greer shook his head. "I don't know, but I'll tell you this. Whoever it was, they weren't just waiting for the storm to pass. They were watching, waiting. It's not just nature that's keeping those ships from returning." A bitter wind tugged at Thomas's coat, pulling his attention back to the boat. His resolve hardened. His sons might still be alive out there somewhere. But if they were alive, they were trapped in something beyond a simple shipwreck. He had to know the truth. Thomas's knuckles were white as he gripped the helm, his eyes narrowing against the salty wind that whipped across his face. The sea around him seemed to stretch endlessly, its dark waves curling like teeth ready to tear at his boat. The Forsaken Isles were a place of myth and terror, a place that had been whispered about in dark corners of taverns, where old men muttered warnings and sailors avoided like the plague. But Thomas had no choice. He had to find his sons, and this was where they had been last seen. He steered the boat through the choppy waters, his movements precise but tense. The rocks seemed to appear out of nowhere, jagged and sharp, forcing him to turn the wheel hard, narrowly avoiding their lethal grasp. The boat groaned under the pressure, its hull scraping against the unseen obstacles below. He could feel the boat shudder beneath him with every gust of wind. Each one was like a warning, a threat that they wouldn't make it much farther. But there was no turning back. The eerie silence that hung over the water was unnerving. The storm clouds above were thick and oppressive, but it was the quiet that bothered him most. It was too still, too empty. And then came the sounds, the soft whispers that seemed to float on the breeze, coming from the depths of the sea or the craggy cliffs rising like dark sentinels around him. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wondered if it was the wind playing tricks or if something else was out there. Something that watched, that waited. Focus, Thomas muttered to himself, shaking his head to clear it. He had to stay sharp, stay focused on finding his boys. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught his eye. At first, he thought it was the reflection of a distant star. But then it blinked again, this time brighter, more deliberate. A signal? A fire? His pulse quickened. It was faint, but it was something. It was hope. A thread of hope in the middle of this desolate place. "Is this it?" Thomas whispered, his voice thick with a mix of fear and anticipation. He turned the boat toward the shore, battling the waves as they grew more furious. His eyes stayed fixed on the light, guiding him through the darkness. As the boat neared the shore, the light grew clearer. There, nestled between two massive rocks, was the entrance to a cave. It was almost hidden, draped in seaweed and jagged stones, as though the earth itself was trying to swallow it whole. Without a second thought, Thomas brought the boat to shore, its bottom scraping against the pebbled beach. He jumped out and waded through the shallow water, his boots sinking into the sand. His mind raced with questions. Could this be where his sons had gone? What had they discovered here? And what had happened to them? The cave entrance loomed ahead of him, dark and foreboding, the faint light from earlier now gone. But Thomas's resolve hardened. This was it. This was the place. He stepped into the cave, his lantern flickering as he moved forward, the damp air clinging to his skin. The scent of salt and decay filled the space, a reminder that whatever had happened here, it was far from ordinary. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness, the sound of his own heartbeat thumping in his chest as he ventured deeper into the darkness. The cave opened up into a wider space, and there, scattered across the floor, were the remnants of a camp. Broken boards, a torn sail, its edges frayed as if it had been ripped apart in a hurry. Personal items lay discarded in the sand, what looked like a jacket, a half-eaten ration, and a small knife, its blade glinting faintly in the dim light. Thomas's heart stopped as he recognized the hilt, the Morgan family crest, engraved deep into the steel. He knelt beside it, trembling fingers brushing the cold steel. His throat tightened, and he swallowed hard. His sons had been here. They had left these things behind. They had been so close. They were here, Thomas whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. The words felt hollow, a statement of truth that didn't bring the comfort he'd hoped for. It only raised more questions. What had happened after they left these signs of life? Where were they now? He looked around, searching for more clues, anything that would explain their sudden disappearance. The air in the cave felt thicker now, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. It was as though the darkness itself had a weight, and the further he went, the heavier it became. He stepped back. The image of the knife still burned into his mind. The camp was abandoned. The remnants of a life that had once been here now lying forgotten on the cave floor. Thomas's mind reeled with possibilities. Had they been attacked? Had they found something dangerous, something that forced them to leave in a hurry? Or had the sea itself taken them? The cave seemed to answer him with nothing but the soft echo of his breath. "They were here," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might shatter the fragile hope he still clung to. But what happened next? Thomas pressed deeper into the cave, the air growing colder as he moved farther away from the entrance. The rhythmic drip of water echoed around him, each drop falling like the ticking of a clock, marking his slow descent into the unknown. His lantern cast fleeting shadows on the jagged walls, the flickers twisting and writhing like dark spirits trapped in the stone. The deeper he went, the more the cave seemed to breathe with him. The sound of his footsteps was muffled by the dense, oppressive silence that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. As he moved cautiously, Thomas's eyes scanned every corner, searching for any signs of his sons. The journal he had found earlier felt heavy in his coat pocket, each page a fragmented testament to their struggle. He had hoped the cave might offer answers, but now, the more he ventured in, the more he realized how little he truly understood about what had happened to them. The brothers had written of strange lights and whispers that seemed to follow them, of something on the island that was watching, waiting. His stomach clenched at the thought of what they had uncovered, what they had found, whatever it was, it had claimed them. The sound of his own breathing became unervingly loud in the silence. Then, a sudden noise snapped him from his thoughts, something scraping against the stone. It was low, but unmistakable. Thomas froze, his heart racing in his chest. The lantern's light wavered as his hand shook, its flame sputtering for a moment. He gripped it tighter, fighting the panic threatening to overtake him. The scrape came again, louder this time, closer. Something was in the cave with him. He could feel it now, a presence lurking in the dark. He swallowed hard and took a step forward, his eyes darting into the inky blackness ahead. His pulse thudded in his ears. The lantern's glow barely illuminated a few feet ahead of him, leaving the rest of the cave in shadow. The scraping noise came again, sharper now, followed by the distinct sound of something or someone moving. Thomas stepped forward, his breath shallow, trying to steady his nerves. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. At first, it was little more than a silhouette, tall, hunched, and swaying, as if unsure on its feet. As it drew closer, the shadows cleared to reveal a man, wild-eyed and ragged, his clothes torn and caked with dirt. His hair hung in tangled knots, and his face was streaked with grime. The figure carried a crude spear, its tip jagged and covered in rust. The man's eyes locked onto Thomas's with an unsettling intensity, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his throat. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, his voice steady but low, a warning in it that betrayed the tight coil of fear in his chest. The man's lips curled into a snarl, his expression contorting in a way that made Thomas's gut tighten. He took a step back, raising his lantern defensively. The stranger didn't respond, his eyes flickering with something almost primal, fear, recognition, or perhaps both. There was a moment of silence, charged and thick, before the man spoke in a voice so hoarse it was barely a whisper. "They found it," he said, his words shaky but urgent, a tremor running through his hands as he gripped the spear tighter. "And now, it's coming for us all." Thomas felt the weight of the man's words, like a cold gust of wind that seeped into his bones. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice more controlled than he felt. The stranger's eyes widened as he took a slow step back, as if he could feel something coming, something far more dangerous than either of them could fully comprehend. His breath quickened, and his gaze darted nervously around the cave as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows. "They didn't know what they were dealing with," the man muttered, more to himself than to Thomas. "I didn't either. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. It's too late now." He looked at Thomas, his expression filled with a combination of fear and regret. If you're looking for your sons, you're too late too. It's already too late. Thomas's heart sank at the man's words. The fear in his eyes, the raw terror that clung to his every word, left no doubt in his mind. This island was hiding something terrible, something that had consumed not just his sons, but this man too. Thomas clenched his fists, trying to hold back the surge of anger and helplessness that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm not leaving without answers," Thomas said firmly, his voice breaking through the tense silence like a knife through fog. The man flinched at the strength in Thomas's tone but didn't back down. He seemed to gather what little courage he had left before speaking again. "You think you can fight it?" he rasped. "You can't. No one can. It's in the island. It's in the air, in the rocks, in the sea. It's been here for centuries, and it will take everything, even you. No one who comes here leaves the same." The words echoed in the cave, a dark warning that only fueled Thomas's determination. His sons had fought to uncover whatever secret the Forsaken Isles were hiding, and now it was his turn. "Where are they?" Thomas demanded. "Tell me everything." The man's eyes flickered once more, this time with a deeper, more primal fear. "They found it," he repeated. "And now it's coming for us all." The cave trembled again, the low rumble vibrating through Thomas's bones. Dust cascaded from the jagged ceiling, settling on his shoulders as he clenched his jaw. The noise from the storm outside was growing louder, crashing against the cliffs with the force of a beast awakened. Malek, his face drawn and grim, adjusted the spear in his hands, his knuckles white against the worn wood. The dim lantern light flickered erratically, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move on their own, as if the cave was alive, watching them. "There's no time," Malek said urgently, his voice low and strained. "If we stay here, it might consume us too." His eyes darted toward the entrance, where the howling wind and crashing waves hinted at the storm's fury just beyond the rocks. Thomas's mind raced, but his gaze remained fixed on the fisherman. The urgency in Malek's words wasn't just the anxiety of being trapped. It was fear, raw and palpable. "What do you mean, consume us?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. He fought to keep the tremor from his words, to keep his fears at bay. His body was already aching from the cold and the dampness that seeped into his bones, but it was the weight of the situation pressing down on him that was unbearable. He needed answers. His sons, Eli, Caleb, and Jonah, had come this way. They had ventured into this cursed place. But why? What was so powerful, so dangerous, that it could drag them into the depths of the island's darkness? Malek looked around the cave, his eyes widening as though searching for something in the flickering shadows. His face tightened, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "The artifact," he said, as if the very mention of it made the air thick with foreboding. "It lies hidden beneath the cliffs, an ancient power, one that controls the sea itself. Many who have sought it, they either disappeared or were driven mad by its call. It's not just a treasure, it's a curse, one that twists the soul and takes everything from you." Thomas's chest tightened. He stepped closer to Malek, desperation creeping into his voice. "You say the artifact controls the sea? What does that mean for my sons? They came looking for it. They must have found it. What happened to them?" Malek's eyes shifted, and he shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the weight of the truth he was about to share. His words seemed to come with great difficulty, as though he had been holding them in for too long. "They didn't just find it, they awakened it. And it awakened them, changed them. The artifact doesn't let go. Consumes the mind, twists it until you're no longer the same person." The brothers may have started this journey for adventure, but they were searching for something much darker, something they couldn't turn away from. Thomas's stomach dropped. The words hung in the air like a curse of their own, pressing on his chest, suffocating him with their meaning. His sons, who had once been so full of life, so full of purpose, now what? Changed? Lost to something he couldn't even begin to comprehend? The thought was unbearable. He clenched his fists, forcing the thoughts back, forcing himself to focus. Do you think they're still alive? Thomas's voice was thick with emotion, but he kept it steady as he could. Malik didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered to the cave's entrance again, and he swallowed hard before speaking. I don't know. What I do know is that no one who has touched the artifact has ever returned the same. Your sons may still be out there, but they're not the same men you remember. They might be waiting, trapped in the curse just like I was. Or worse, they could have become. He trailed off, and the words he couldn't speak filled the silence between them. The rumble outside grew louder, and Thomas's heart skipped a beat as the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The cave, the island, the storm, they were all connected. This was no accident. The island was alive with something ancient, something that had been waiting for them to come. And now that they had arrived, Thomas could feel the pull of something terrible, something that could drag them all into the same abyss. I'm not leaving without them, Thomas said through gritted teeth, the determination in his voice cutting through the panic. The reality of what he was facing didn't matter. His sons were out there somewhere, and he would bring them back no matter the cost. Malik looked at him, his expression a mix of admiration and caution. You don't understand. This island, it doesn't just take bodies. It takes the soul. The artifact is a part of it, but it's not the only thing. The island itself, whatever is here, it has a hold on you. It won't let go. Thomas shook his head, refusing to listen. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find them, and I'm bringing them home. Malik opened his mouth as if to protest, but before he could speak, the ground shook again, more violently this time. The air seemed to grow colder, and the wind outside howled louder, as if it were alive, angry, and closing in on them. The walls of the cave groaned under the pressure, and dust swirled around them. We don't have much time, Malik said, his voice rising in urgency. The island is waking up. If we stay any longer, we won't leave it. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, torn between the pull of the storm outside and the knowledge that his sons might still be alive somewhere on this forsaken island. The curse, the danger, the darkness, they were all real. But they were also his only chance to bring his sons back. I'll risk it, Thomas whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I'll risk everything. We've got to move, Malik urged, his eyes wild now, filled with fear and something else, something darker that Thomas couldn't place. Now, before it's too late. And with that, the cave trembled once more, a final warning before everything descended into chaos. We don't have much time, Malik said grimly. If we stay, it might consume us too. Thomas's breath hitched as he stepped over the threshold into the ruins. The storm outside howled like a living thing, but here, inside the ancient temple, the air was eerily still, too still. Every corner of the crumbling walls seemed to loom, as if waiting for something to happen. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the twisted statues and half-obliterated pillars. The walls, carved with strange symbols, seemed to pulse in the dim light, as if alive. His pulse quickened, and an unsettling feeling crept up his spine. The place smelled of damp stone, salt water, and something else, something heavier, older. He could almost taste it, the ancient history and untold secrets that had been buried here for centuries. The further they ventured into the temple, the more oppressive the air became. Thomas gripped his lantern tightly, the light flickering as though struggling to hold against the darkness around them. Malik moved silently beside him, his spear poised and ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Thomas glanced at him, noticing the sharpness in the man's gaze. Malik was no stranger to danger, but even he looked uneasy now. He had warned Thomas about the curse of the island, about the guardian creature, but this was different. This was something deeper. A presence in the air that felt as though it had been waiting for them, watching them, for much longer than they had been here. Stay close, Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind that seemed to penetrate the stone walls, as if the storm itself were trying to claw its way in. Malik nodded, but his jaw was tight, his body tense. As they moved deeper into the temple, the atmosphere grew thicker. Thomas felt as though the stones themselves were watching him. His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the broken remnants of weapons scattered across the floor. Rusted swords, shattered shields, and long-forgotten tools. The evidence of a fight, but who had fought here? Had his sons fought this same battle? A sudden noise, a scraping sound, faint but sharp, echoed through the temple. Thomas froze, every muscle in his body locking up. His instincts screamed that they weren't alone. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, twisting like living things. His gaze snapped to the far wall, where the faintest movement caught his eye. Something or someone was there. "Malek?" Thomas murmured, his voice tight. "We're not alone." Malek tensed beside him, the tip of his spear raised, ready to strike. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. The flickering light from his lantern danced on the walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to take on lives of their own. The strange symbols on the walls glowed faintly, like watching eyes, their meaning lost to time but their presence undeniable. Then, the sound came again, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the very bones of the temple. The growl was so deep, so primal, that it felt like it came from the very earth itself. Thomas felt a cold shiver run through his body. This was not just the wind or the storm. There was something alive here, something ancient and powerful that had been disturbed by their presence. Malek's grip on his spear tightened, his body coiling like a spring. Thomas's breath came in shallow gasps as he felt the walls close in around him. They had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed for eternity. The temple had been waiting, guarding its secrets, and now they were here, and it wasn't going to let them leave. Malek's voice was barely a whisper, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "We've awakened it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Thomas's mind raced. His sons had been here. They had uncovered something hidden beneath the island's surface, something that had claimed them. Was it this creature? Had they known the risks and still pressed on? Had they fought this guardian, only to be consumed by it? A sound, a low scraping, came from deeper in the temple, followed by another growl, louder this time, vibrating the very ground beneath their feet. The creature was near, and whatever it wasn't going to let them leave without a fight. The very stones beneath Thomas's feet seemed to pulse with the growing energy of the temple, the air thick with a malevolent force that seemed to draw closer with every passing second. Thomas's hand tightened around the lantern's handle, his knuckles white. His heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve remained unbroken. He had come this far for his sons. He couldn't back down now. He whispered to Malek, his voice steely despite the fear that threatened to creep into his thoughts. "Stay focused. We need to move. Keep your eyes open." Malek nodded, his face grim, but his body had already started to move, stepping cautiously forward. The scraping sound continued, followed by a harsh breath that sounded too loud in the silence. The growl was closer now, closer than ever. Something massive was moving just beyond their sight. Thomas's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that might give them an advantage. His breath caught as he spotted a small, narrow passageway leading deeper into the temple's heart. It was their only way out. The shadows in the distance seemed to gather, swirling like a storm. The growling grew louder, closer, and the ground trembled beneath them. They had no time left. "We're not leaving here without answers," Thomas muttered, voice steady as he began to move toward the narrow passage. "Let's go." The temple, its walls trembling with power, seemed to hold its breath as the two men moved forward, hearts racing, the growl echoing in the distance. They had come too far to stop now. "We've awakened it," Malek whispered, voice barely audible over the thunder. If that moment left you speechless, don't stay silent. Subscribe and become a member, because uncovering the past takes courage and determination. The growling reverberated through the cave, deep and primal, rattling the very stones beneath Thomas's feet. His lantern trembled in his hand, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls as he stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. The darkness ahead seemed to swell and breathe, the growl building in pitch, growing louder, closer. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with a cold dread. He wanted to run, to turn back, but he couldn't. Not now. The air grew thick with the scent of salt and decay. And then, through the oppressive blackness, a figure emerged. Massive and terrifying, it loomed before him, its body a shifting mass of shadow and muscle. The creature's eyes burned with an unnatural fire, red and ancient, glinting with rage and sorrow. Its enormous form was draped in scales that shimmered like the surface of the sea, its clawed hands reaching for the ground with a deep, unsettling rhythm. Every muscle rippled with the tension of centuries of guarding, centuries of hatred. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as he took a step back, his mind racing. How could he fight this? It wasn't a beast, it was a guardian. Bound to this place. Bound to the artifact. The memories of Malek's warnings echoed in his ears. It's not just the artifact. It's the power. The artifact changes men. It turns them into monsters, slaves of the sea. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. His sons had come to this place. His sons had disturbed this creature, and now they were paying the price. But he could still save them. He could still fix it. His hand gripped the lantern tighter, its warm glow casting long, flickering shadows against the cavern's jagged walls. The creature's growl rose again, almost a roar, shaking the very air around them. He couldn't let fear control him. Not now. Not when his sons were counting on him. Malek! Thomas's voice broke through the chaos, raw and urgent. Get ready! Malek, standing a few paces behind him, nodded grimly, tightening his grip on the spear in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, but he steadied himself, shoulders square. We have to get to the artifact, he muttered under his breath, voice barely audible over the rumbling growls. We destroy it, we end this. The guardian moved, slow but deliberate, its massive limbs sweeping the ground with every step. It was a creature of the sea, ancient and immortal, cursed to keep the artifact safe and to punish any who dared to take it. Thomas's mind raced. He couldn't allow it to take Malek or himself, or worse, to let it keep the artifact in its power. He needed to buy them time. Raising the lantern high, Thomas stared into the creature's eyes. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The creature froze, its glowing gaze locking with his. In that instant, Thomas could almost feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, could almost hear the whispers of lost souls trapped within the stone walls. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The creature's growl softened, but its eyes burned brighter, its body coiling as if preparing to strike. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. I won't let you stop us, he muttered, his voice fierce. The lantern's light flickered weakly, but it held. It was all he had, and for his sons it was enough. Suddenly the creature lunged. Thomas barely had time to react. He dove to the side, rolling across the cave floor as the beast's claws slashed through the air, missing him by mere inches. He heard the sound of Malek's spear slicing through the air behind him, but it was too slow. The creature's powerful tail swung, knocking Malek off his feet, sending him crashing against the stone wall. A sickening thud echoed through the cave as Malek crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. No! Thomas shouted, panic surging through him. His muscles screamed as he pushed himself to his feet, forcing himself to focus. The creature was turning back toward Malek, its eyes flashing with fury. This was his chance. Thomas lunged forward, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground and throwing it toward the creature's eyes. The stone struck its face with a dull thud, but it didn't flinch. It didn't stop. Instead, it growled louder, its anger filling the air with an overwhelming pressure. The cave trembled, the walls shaking as if the island itself was alive, breathing, stirring. Eli! Caleb? Thomas whispered, his breath ragged. What would they have done? His sons had faced this creature. They had fought it and they had failed. But they had kept their resolve. They had been strong. And now so would he. With a shout, Thomas hurled the lantern at the creature, sending it crashing into the ground. The explosion of light startled the beast, momentarily blinding it. For a split second, It paused, its roar cutting off in a strangled, frustrated cry. This was it. Thomas's chest heaved as he scrambled to his feet, heart pounding with fear and determination. His hand reached for his knife, the one he'd carried with him since the beginning. The Morgan family crest gleamed in the dim light. This knife had been passed down for generations, a symbol of their strength, a symbol of their will. He didn't know if he could kill the creature, but he could fight. For his sons. For the truth. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto the creature's glowing red ones. It was coming for him now, but he wasn't backing down. Not when there was still a chance to save them. Not when he had the strength to stand. And through the chaos, a voice echoed in his mind. Eli's final words scrawled in the journal. The artifact must never leave the island. The creature snarled, a guttural sound that shook the ancient stones, before stumbling backward, blinded by the harsh glow of Thomas's lantern. Its massive form pressed against the jagged wall, eyes burning with fury and pain. Thomas's chest heaved as adrenaline surged through his veins, heart pounding like a drum in the narrow, water-slick corridor. He didn't dare look back. The beast's heavy breathing echoed just steps behind them, relentless and terrifying. "Follow me," Malik hissed urgently, his voice barely audible over the crashing waves outside and the pounding of Thomas's own heartbeat. The fisherman's eyes darted ahead, sharp and wary, scanning the darkness for danger. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, moving quickly but carefully along the treacherous path. Thomas struggled to keep pace, his boots slipping against the slick stone, the cold seawater soaking through the cracks in the floor. Every step sent a shiver up his spine, not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of the mission before him. He could almost taste the salt on his lips, mixed with fear and determination. What awaited deeper in the ruins? Would he find his sons alive? Or would the artifact's dark curse have already claimed their souls? The passage narrowed further, forcing them to press single file beneath jagged rocks that seemed to claw at the very air. A thin spray of seawater misted Thomas's face, mixing with the sweat that dripped down his brow. His fingers trembled as he gripped the rough stone wall, grounding himself. "Stay close," Malik whispered, glancing back with a fierce urgency. "We don't have much time before it recovers." A distant, low growl rumbled through the cavern, sending vibrations through the floor and walls. Thomas swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. The sound was growing louder, closer. At last, the passage opened into a wide chamber bathed in an eerie blue light that pulsed softly like a heartbeat. The source was a small pedestal carved from black stone, slick with moisture and encrusted with salt. Resting atop it was the orb, strange and otherworldly. Its surface shimmered with intricate runes that seemed to shift and crawl under Thomas's gaze. Drawn forward, Thomas stepped cautiously, each footfall muffled by the damp floor. The orb's glow beckoned him, whispering secrets in a language he could almost understand, a siren call that tugged at something deep inside. He reached out a trembling hand, the air thick with electric tension. Suddenly, images crashed into his mind like a storm. Faces, his sons, twisted and haunted. Eli's strong jaw now drawn tight with pain. Caleb's steady eyes, clouded by shadow. Jonah's quiet fear, etched deep into his features. They were trapped, changed, and snared by the artifact's terrible power. The visions blurred and pulsed, overwhelming him with grief and desperation. Thomas's breath hitched. The growling from the chamber's entrance grew louder, accompanied by the heavy thud of massive footsteps. The creature was closing in, ready to reclaim its prize. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with strain. The terrible choice lay before him. Destroy the orb and risk losing his sons forever, or leave it intact and doom them, and possibly others, to an endless torment beyond death. "Malik," Thomas whispered, voice breaking but resolute. "This ends now, no matter the cost." The fisherman nodded, his expression grim but steady. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." The chamber seemed to pulse with anticipation, the orb's blue light flaring brighter as if sensing Thomas's decision. With a final, shuddering breath, Thomas stepped forward, ready to face the darkness. The creature's growls closed in behind him. Thomas knew what he had to do, but the cost was terrifying. To destroy the artifact might mean losing his sons forever, but to keep it meant endless torment. Thomas's hand hovered over the orb, his fingertips trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. The stone beneath him seemed to pulse in response, the air thick with the weight of something ancient and unspeakable. His heart hammered in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears, drowning out the rumbling of the storm outside. The orb shimmered, its surface smooth and inviting, but the power that radiated from it was unmistakable, a pull that gnawed at his soul. Memories of his sons, Eli, Caleb, and Jonah, flashed before his eyes. Their laughter, their dreams, the promise they made to return. It had been so long since he'd seen them, touched them, heard their voices. He could still hear Eli's voice ringing in his mind. "We'll be back by autumn." His chest tightened. He glanced at Malek, who stood at the entrance to the chamber, his spear gripped tightly in his hands, eyes darting nervously toward the growing roar of the storm. The guardian was close. Thomas could feel its presence in every corner of the temple, a dark shadow creeping closer with each passing second. "Thomas," Malek's voice was low but urgent. "We don't have much time. We need to go now." Thomas didn't move. His breath came in shallow bursts, his mind caught between the agony of loss and the desire to save his sons. What if this was the only way? What if this was the key? But a terrible thought gnawed at him. What if breaking it would only make things worse? The storm outside raged, lightning flashing through the cracks in the temple stone, and with it came the deafening roar of the guardian. It was close, closer than ever. Malek's grip on his spear tightened as the creature's growl reverberated through the stone walls. Thomas closed his eyes, the weight of the decision crushing him. The orb pulsed in his hands again, its energy vibrating through his bones. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. He was no longer fighting just for the truth or for answers. He was fighting for his sons, for their souls, for the chance to see them again, to bring them home. His hand shot forward with sudden, fierce resolve, and the orb shattered against the cold, unforgiving stone. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber, and a blinding light erupted from the broken fragments, enveloping the room in a blinding, searing brightness. The very air seemed to vibrate with raw power, and for a moment, time itself felt suspended. The force of the explosion knocked both men off their feet, sending them sprawling across the cold stone floor. The wind outside howled as the temple shook violently, the ancient structure groaning in protest. But Thomas couldn't focus on that now. His thoughts were filled only with the image of his sons, faces twisted in agony, trapped in a world between life and death, ensnared by the artifact's terrible curse. The light from the orb seemed to stretch on forever, burning his eyes even with them squeezed shut. And then, just as suddenly, it faded. Thomas opened his eyes, but the image of his sons, their faces, their cries, remained etched in his mind. "Thomas!" Malek's voice was strained, filled with urgency. "We need to move. Now!" The ground trembled beneath them, sending a fresh wave of panic crashing through Thomas's chest. He scrambled to his feet, pushing himself up on shaky legs. The temple was collapsing. Ancient stone pillars cracked and crumbled above them, sending dust and debris raining down. The chamber groaned, its foundation giving way to the power of the artifact's destruction. Malek grabbed Thomas's arm, yanking him toward the exit. "This place is coming down. We can't stay here any longer." The two men stumbled through the dark passage, the air thick with dust, the walls shaking violently as the temple began to collapse around them. A massive stone column fell behind them with a deafening crash, narrowly missing them both. Malek's eyes darted back at the falling rubble, his face pale, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "We're not going to make it," Malek shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We have to hurry." Thomas pushed forward, his mind racing. His sons. He had to find them. He had to save them. But the island was fighting back. The artifact's curse had been broken, but its wrath had been unleashed, and the very earth seemed to tremble in response. As they reached the mouth of the cave, the sky above them cracked open with another bolt of lightning. The air smelled of sulfur, of ancient power awakened, and for the briefest moment, Thomas thought he saw shadows move in the corners of his vision. But there was no time to question it. Mind. Thomas nodded, clutching the journal in his hands. The leather was damp now, the edges curling from the moisture in the air, but he gripped it tightly, as if the journal itself were a lifeline. It had been his guide, the last remnants of his son's journey. Their words, scrawled in desperation, filled his mind, urging him forward even as the island seemed to push them back. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, the silence only broken by the occasional whisper of the wind or the ominous slap of waves against the hull. Thomas stood at the helm, his eyes straining to see through the fog, but it was no use. The world had narrowed to nothing but mist and shadow. The ruins of the island, which had once stood as a beacon of mystery, now felt like a tomb, quiet, ominous, and full of secrets that had been waiting for centuries to be uncovered. As the boat crept closer, Thomas's heart beat louder in his chest. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: hope, dread, love, guilt. Every inch of this journey felt like a test, one that had started with the disappearance of his sons and would end in something he couldn't yet understand. His sons had ventured here, seeking something that had driven them to the brink of madness, to fight something ancient, something far more terrifying than a mere storm. And now, Thomas was about to face whatever they had uncovered. Is it just me, or does the water seem colder? One of the crew members muttered, his voice shaky. His hand gripped the side of the boat, knuckles white. He was a young man, one of the newer recruits, his face pale with fear as the fog seemed to press in closer, suffocating the life out of the sea itself. "It's not just you," Malik answered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had felt the island's curse firsthand. "It's the island. The closer we get, the more it pulls at you, until you can't tell where the sea ends and the fog begins." Thomas's stomach tightened. Malik's words were hauntingly accurate. The fog felt like a living thing, wrapping itself around them, blocking out the world. He tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping into his bones, focusing instead on the journal. His sons had written about the strange things they had seen, the odd occurrences that made no sense, but there had been one constant, the presence of something watching them. And now, as the island loomed just beyond the mist, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had watched his sons was now watching him. "Do you think they're still alive?" the young crew member asked, voice barely audible over the wind. His eyes were wide, searching Thomas for an answer, though Thomas had none to give. "I don't know," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned away, focusing on the mist ahead, unable to meet the crew member's gaze. "But I'm not leaving until I find out." Malik gave him a long, measuring look but didn't respond. His silence spoke volumes. He knew the cost of venturing into these waters, and the price they might all have to pay. Thomas felt the weight of the decision press on him, heavier than any storm. Finally, the boat broke through the fog, and the island rose before them, dark, foreboding, and ancient. The ruins of the temple were just visible, silhouetted against the pale light filtering through the mist. It seemed to loom over them like a silent sentinel, watching their every move, as if it were alive, breathing with a pulse as old as the earth itself. Thomas stepped forward, his heart pounding. He felt the eyes of his crew on him, the pressure mounting. They had come this far, but he knew that what lay ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet understand. This was no longer just about finding his sons. It was about surviving the island's curse, about facing whatever darkness had taken hold of them. The boat drifted closer to the shore, the sands of the Forsaken Isles now within reach. As Thomas stared ahead, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and he whispered under his breath, "We've awakened it." The ruins seemed to pulse with energy, the symbols carved into the stones faintly glowing as the storm's winds howled around them, but the world had gone eerily silent. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Thomas knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that whatever came next would change everything. The brothers' fight had left a mark, both on the island and on their souls. Thomas knew that whatever awaited inside would test his courage and love beyond anything he'd faced before. The air in the cavernous heart of the Forsaken Isles felt thick and heavy, as though it were holding its breath. Thomas stepped carefully, the rough stone under his boots slick with moisture, the faint scent of salt water mingling with the musty scent of decay. His lantern cast long shadows along the walls, highlighting the remnants of the Morgan brothers' last fight. Scattered across the stone floor were the signs of desperate resistance, broken weapons, scorched marks on the ground, and scraps of clothing torn as though the fabric had been ripped by the very winds of the storm that had ravaged this place. Thomas's heart tightened in his chest as he crouched beside a fragment of a broken sword, its hilt bearing a familiar engraving, the family crest. His mind reeled. His sons had been here. They had faced something monstrous, something more than a storm. But what had they fought? And why had they fought alone? He swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside him, but his throat was dry, his pulse quickening. Every inch of this place seemed to tell a story of pain and sacrifice, of a battle that had torn his family apart. Eli, Caleb, Jonah. He whispered their names into the oppressive silence, as though saying them aloud might summon them back. His voice cracked on Jonah's name, the youngest, the one who had never been afraid of the sea. But the sea was not the only thing that had taken them. He moved deeper into the cave, past the remnants of their last stand, into a chamber that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The walls were etched with symbols, arcane markings that twisted in impossible patterns. They glowed faintly in the lantern's light, as if the stone itself were alive, breathing. The air grew colder, more charged. His every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But he couldn't. Not after everything. Not after all that had led him here. At the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal, was the artifact, the orb. It shimmered with an eerie blue light, its surface smooth, almost inviting. The runes that covered it seemed to move, shifting and changing as though they were alive, as though they had a will of their own. Thomas felt a pull deep within him, a desire to reach out and take it, to see what secrets it held. He knew, deep down, that it was the source of the darkness that had claimed his sons. But it was more than that. The brothers had warned of its power, of how it twisted the minds of those who sought it. Eli had written it in his journal. The artifact was not just a thing to be taken. It was a force, an ancient curse that could change the very fabric of reality. And his sons had found it. A low rumble shook the floor beneath him, and for the first time since his arrival, Thomas allowed himself to feel fear. He wasn't alone. Something was watching him, something ancient, something that had waited here for centuries, guarding the secrets of the island. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to grow deeper, pressing in on him from all sides. He turned to see the silhouette of a figure, moving from the shadows. His heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in the same ragged attire as Malik. But this was no man. The figure stepped closer, and Thomas could see the twisted, unnatural gleam in its eyes. A creature not quite human, but not entirely something else either. Its face was contorted with an expression of fury, its body shifting in strange, fluid motions. The creature opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth. "You shouldn't have come," it growled, its voice a rasping whisper. "They were meant to keep it contained, but now you've awakened it. And now, you'll pay the price." Thomas stood frozen, staring at the guardian of the artifact. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant rumble of the storm outside. He felt a rush of cold dread, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm here to save them." The creature let out a low, guttural laugh. "You can't save them, not from what they've become. The artifact takes, and it never gives back." Thomas's mind raced. The realization was horrifying. His sons had fought to protect the artifact, to keep it from being unleashed on the world. They had given their lives to contain the darkness. And now it was his turn to make the ultimate choice. With a sudden surge of strength, Thomas reached for the orb, his hands trembling as he touched its surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the world around him exploded in light. Pain seared through his body, his mind flooded with images of his sons, Eli, Caleb, Jonah, faces twisted by the artifact's power. He saw them fighting, struggling against the force that had taken hold of them. But he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope. They were still there, but the cost was great. The light pulsed, and Thomas felt his very soul being torn in two. He understood now. The artifact could only be destroyed by the one who had awakened it. And to do so would mean letting go of everything, his sons, his family, the hope that they might one day return. As the light dimmed, Thomas stood alone, the orb shattered at his feet. The island seemed to shudder, the air clearing as if a great weight had been lifted. The guardian let out a final, blood-curdling scream before disappearing into the shadows. Thomas dropped to his knees, gasping for breath. The storm outside had passed, and the first rays of dawn broke over the island. The shadows that had clung to the land began to fade, replaced by the soft light of morning. The curse was lifted. The artifact was no more. He stood slowly, his body aching, his heart heavy. The price had been paid. And though he had destroyed the darkness, it had taken his sons with it. The island had claimed them, but in the end, their sacrifice had saved the world. Thomas turned toward the shore, his heart broken, but resolute. The town of Seabridge awaited him, and he would return with the truth, with the story of his sons' bravery and their final stand. They set sail and never returned, Thomas would say, voice steady. But their sacrifice saved us all. The mystery was finally solved. If you stand for answers and justice, hit subscribe and join the channel. Together we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional, created to explore the mysteries of unresolved disappearances and the power of discovering hidden truths. Its purpose is to inspire conversations about family, closure, and the impact of long-held secrets.